Rapunzel's Tangled Adventures is a show that I think doesn't get enough love. I suppose it was popular enough for what it was, but as somebody who came to the series later than most, as in 4 years after it had fully concluded, I can't help but feel rather salty that it was just 3 seasons and then done. No spin-offs, no continuations, no nothing. To me, it was honestly rather surprising to see that, as Tangled is still a rather popular franchise. Perhaps not on the levels of Frozen, but how many franchises are? So I figured there's more they could do, especially since the world they crafted over the course of the show's run seems to be one that's completely tailor-made for a spin-off of some description. At the end of the show, just off the top of my head, they have Cass going off on a world quest of some sort to find herself. We all know what I think of Cass and her half-baked redemption arc, so there's no need to retread old ground here, but even that would have had potential for a lot of fun. No spin-off ever came though, which is sad, but I did see a whole lot of comments and discussion that centered around what they had stated had been a planned Varian spin-off series, which even before I looked into it, broke my heart a little. When I first watched the show, Varian right from his early days was one of my favourite characters. He was so goofy and wholesome and fit right into the world. His villain arc was certainly written a bit strangely, but on his return in Season 3, I felt like the writing surrounding his character was done pretty well. So a spin-off following his character? Hell yeah, sign me up! So I did a little bit of digging, because this is one of those things that has so much traction on social media. People are always chatting about this mythical cancelled spin-off that never got off the ground due to Disney not thinking his character was the right fit, wanting to use an original character instead, whilst the creator said no, and it all just came to nothing. Just based on that alone, with no real research at all, I'm not sure why you'd think an original character would do any better than Varian as a draw though. If Varian's not popular enough to helm a series despite having been in an actual TV show, how would you think a fresh character's gonna go? Who knows. It might not even be true at all, but that's how the story goes at the very least. I wasn't sure how much of it was the truth though, and so I did have to go back and take a look into it. So from what I found, the bare bones concept of this story would follow Varian going out on a quest to search for the 7 alchemical laws, which he'd then use to try to find his mother, who disappeared under suspicious circumstances many years ago, whilst also contending with her former research partner Danella, who would be his initial antagonist. Along the way, he'd pick up a group of ragtag heroes to join his squad and meet other distant members of his family. He would discover that his mother had been the villain all along. We would, I assume, then get some sort of redemption arc, as Tangled loves a good redemption arc, don't they? It's just part of the DNA at this point, I guess. So that's the bare bones plot, and more on that later, but for now, I have to say it does shock me how these things can almost just take on a life of their own in some ways. Because when I did a little bit of digging into this, I found no evidence that this show was ever actually going to be made at all. Instead, it seems to have always been planned as some sort of comic book series. Suddenly, Disney's lack of enthusiasm made a lot of sense, because as a show, I think you could make this concept work, and it would develop some popularity, but in the form of a comic book, I just don't see it picking up any sort of steam or traction. It's a niche product of a niche part of the fandom that only a small fraction's ever going to bother to consume. So suddenly it all makes sense to me. Of course, as I said, it doesn't look like there was ever any plans for this to be turned into a long-form show or anything of the sort, just a comic book series that never got off the ground. So it was rather surprising to me that it managed to morph into this grand story of the mean old mouse holding down our beloved spin-off show, but it is what it is, I guess. I'm honestly just rather shocked there isn't some sort of continuation or spin-off anyway. Did the show get bad viewership numbers? Otherwise, I just don't know. In the end though, like I said, it was seemingly never in the works to be an actual show or anything of the sort. That being said though, having read through some of this stuff and taken a look at some of the character blurbs they gave out, I kind of think it should be a show. I mean, is a story following Cass definitely what it felt like was being built up to at the end of the final season of Tangled Adventures? Yes. Yes, most definitely. I mean, she literally leaves to go on a quest for an indefinite period of time to find herself and where she belongs, yada yada yada. So, I think it's supremely odd that we have never gotten that either, but I think that's a video for another time. Because now that I've seen this, I really just wish it would be made, and not as a comic, but a proper TV show. I'll be honest, there's no chance I'm going to bother sitting down to read a comic about Varian. I like the series and the characters and the world, I love Varian, but in that context, it is not the same. Those types of comics are just never all that good. We're not talking about Batman, we're talking stuff on the level of the miraculous comics. Hell, I love The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra, but I honestly preferred to just read the synopsis of the story on Wikipedia for the comics and the novels, rather than potentially sit down to read a book or comic of dubious quality after paying for it. I love reading, but context matters to me. And if it's originally a show, I often find the written adaptations or spin-offs just don't recapture that vibe. If it's originally based on a book, it's all good, but otherwise, nah. So yeah, please make this show. It just looks like it'd be really interesting and fun. So for now, let's just imagine that this comic was a show and that they're gonna make it. How would it all go down? What would happen? I mean, we've talked about the overarching plot and the mum twist villain earlier in the video, so maybe let's take a look at some of the character blurbs to see what we can find there, and what we can perhaps infer in regards to potential story. After all, this series was meant to have all the twists and turns you'd come to know and love from Tangled, so clearly they had a number of ideas ready to go. Our lead characters would consist of Varian. Varian is a spirited, tenacious young alchemist from Corona who's eager to learn everything there is to know about alchemy and magic. Seeing himself as a bit of an outcast in Corona, Varian decides to travel to new kingdoms with an almanac once belonging to his adventurous mother. On this journey, Varian's looking for missing pieces of himself, seeking his tribe. By completing his mother's works, Varian hopes to gain a better understanding of himself. We saw throughout Varian's entire arc in the OG show that he was always a bit of an outsider in Corona. He was laughed at, teased, often scorned. The dude just didn't fit in. No matter how hard he tried to latch onto characters like Eugene, Rapunzel, or Cass, it never really worked. It does make a lot of sense for that to be the major story thread for his particular character. Finding where he can belong, whether that's with new friends, his cousins that he meets, or indeed the mother he's searching for. Next up, we have Hugo. Hugo comes from a technologically advanced yet economically divided kingdom. As a result, he lives like a criminal, stealing riches to fund his experiments and to live a more lavish life. He's everything Varian thinks he wants to be in terms of street smarts, intelligence, and style. However, Hugo can be very mischievous and sneaky and is often out for himself. On top of that, Hugo would be revealed to have been an agent for Donella and turned his back on her over the course of the show. So it's clear that this dude was being set up to be a bit of a hybrid of Eugene and Cass. Like Eugene and Cass, he's a character that Varian really looks up to and wants to emulate as much as possible. Like Eugene, he's a character who's slightly outside the law, having grown up and lived in poverty, and thus he can be a bit of a wild card, a bit selfish and greedy, but with a heart underneath it all. Then combine that with the Cass betrayal and her redemption arc, but seemingly in reverse, where he starts off bad and betrays the villain to turn good, whilst also having some Varian-like curiosity and an inventive streak, and suddenly you have a character who I guarantee would have become wildly, wildly popular. I mean, let's take a look at his design. Yep, popular for sure. Next up, we've got Yong. Yong is a sweet, accident-prone kid with the best intentions from a kingdom known for its glorious fireworks and pyrotechnics. His inventions end up exploding, catching fire, or otherwise blowing up in his face. Yong's true ambition is to invent something that does not combust. He possesses the same over-eager enthusiasm for inventing that Varian was notorious for in Corona. This leads Varian to see him as a bit of a younger brother. So from the get-go, the dude oozes that Lance/Hookfoot energy where he's clearly there to be the comic relief character and to play more minor roles in episodes. Rarely would you think that he's going to be the one that's getting a whole heap of development outside of a few tailor-made one-off episodes, e.g. Hookfoot's romance with the mermaid, which never got any follow-up, I might add, and also his storyline where he wanted to be a dancer, but he was mocked by his brother. That's the level you're talking about for Yong. At best, maybe he's like Lance, having episodes where the show's going to explore his specific bond with Varian and how they're growing close like brothers, and how that dynamic shapes their adventures, and Yong's inventions. Then we have Princess Nuru. Princess Nuru comes from a kingdom plagued by cosmic disaster. Recurring meteor showers devastate her kingdom, forcing hardship on her people as they must constantly rebuild it. With her people unable to thrive, Nuru wants to use her power as a princess to find a way to save her people. Nuru believes, with further research, she may be able to find a solution to her plight. She joins Varian and her friends in the hopes of accomplishing this. Within the group, she acts as a navigator and a diplomat, but remains wary of characters like Hugo. So she feels like the goody-goody character. And I have to side-eye a kingdom that keeps getting destroyed by meteors and thinks that continually rebuilding instead of calling it a day and relocating is the smarter play. In all honesty, her storyline sounds rather boring to me, but her suspicion of Hugo would have set the shippers aflame. Aflame! Mark my words. There is nothing they love more than a good enemies to lovers, and here we have one tailor-made. And finally, we come to Donella and Ulla. And we'll start with Donella. Many years ago, Donella was a research partner to Varian's mother, and is now presumed to be responsible for her death. Currently, Donella's trying to find a way to access her former colleague's secrets. As a means to accomplishing this, she employs Hugo to act as a double agent for her, infiltrating Varian's travel party disguised as a friend. And then there's Ulla. Once a fearless adventurer in pursuit of knowledge, Ulla disappeared after a disagreement with her research partner Donella. Upon disappearing from Corona, Ulla left behind her husband Kieran and her son Varian. An almanac detailing her adventures and studies was left behind by Kieran and later discovered by Varian, charting a secret destination. So we know that Ulla was going to be the villain overall. Likely Donella was going to be a misunderstood character doing the wrong things for the right reasons, simply trying to ensure that whatever Ulla was doing was going to stay buried, or something like that. Or maybe they were both villains, who knows? We will never know, I guess. I think it would have been interesting to have them both be evil for different reasons. Villains don't always have to team up, and I think it's usually better when they don't because it shows that the characters have nuance and their own goals and personalities and thoughts. And I think it could have been just a really interesting storyline. Oh, and plus we have all this cool concept art. I've made myself sad here. I can't believe it. The characters are so interesting. The potential storylines are endless. There's so much potential lore and adventure. I just wish at the very least that this comic existed. I wish even more that it was a show. Anyway, before I feel any worse, better call it a day, I think. And so with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think we've discussed today? Does this idea, bare bones that it is, have any potential? Would it have been better as the envisioned comic, or instead as a proper show? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.